all actions and the failure to act have consequences. It follows a higher law, a law higher than that of the intellect, a law that we may call the law of the divine. It is extremely fair and impartial. It has a vision which is much wider than that of the individual and much wider than that of the present moment. It's looking. So first, he's given important characteristics of one who is stable in intelligence or is a sthita pragya. This person has no desires and is satisfied in the self by the self. This difference between outer and inner renunciation, Sri Aurobindo has brought out very clearly in the essays on the Gita, and he says throughout that the Gita has emphasized inner rather than outer renunciation. Inner renunciation is what is tyaga, and outer renunciation is sannyas.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome. It gives me great joy to invite all of you to the final segment of our exploration of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The closing verses of this adhyay are not merely philosophical reflections. They offer us a living blueprint for inner steadiness. The teachings on Sthit Pragya, the person of stable wisdom, are among the most profound and transformative insights of the Gita. Today's session is especially significant because it moves us from understanding to embodiment. It invites us to ask, what does steadiness look like in today's world? How do we remain anchored amidst uncertainty, emotions, ambition, and relationships? We are blessed to have Dr. Bijlani with us, who will help us decode these subtle yet powerful qualities of the Sthit Pragya in a lucid, practical, and contemporary way. His guidance helps bridge timeless wisdom with the realities of modern living. To reach the concluding part of chapter 2 of the Gita is truly divine blessing. With prayers to continue receiving this grace, we hope to move on to chapter 3 the next month. With gratitude in our hearts and blessings of the divine guiding us, let us begin.
Thank you, Richa, for a beautiful beginning. And I say, well begun is half done. So, in a way, half the session is over. uh, Before we go further, I thought I'll bring out something from the last session, the uh, verse that is quoted so often and which even I have understood a little better during the last 1 month as a result of further reflection. Karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. That is, we are entitled to action, but not to the outcome. Now, this entitlement to action is a part of the free will that has been planted in us. We are programmed in such a way that we do have a free will and we can choose our action. Not only we are free to act, but also choose the action. Not only we can choose the action, we can also choose how we will do it, uh, whether we'll do it in a perfunctory manner or try to do it as well as we can. Even that free will we have. What spirit we'll do it in, whether we'll do it in the spirit of karma yoga or in the spirit of my being the worker, my being the doer in an egoistic fashion. So how we will do it and what spirit we will do it, that also we have the free will to choose that. We also have the free will not to act at all. Not acting at all is also a type of karma, and that free will also we have. So we have more or less complete and total control over what we do or we don't do. A beautiful example of it came out recently. You might have seen a video that went viral, a short clip of the President of India, Srimati Draupadi Murmu, trying to unveil a statue, and in the audience, people around her was a little girl, maybe around 5 year old, and the president very lovingly told her, hold here, because she wanted that she should also participate in pulling that string that will unveil the statue. So she told the child very lovingly, hold here. And what did the child say? No. Looked very cute. But the child said no. So the child asserted that free will, that I'm choose free not to act. Beautiful example. Only a child could do it. And everybody laughed when the child said no. So, anyway, so we are free to choose our action, how we do it, and choose not to act at all. On that, we have total control. And all actions and the failure to act, all these have consequences. That also is unavoidable. But the consequences, which we may call the outcome, is not in our own hands. In fact, it is not in our hands at all. If it happens to coincide with the consequences that you had visualized, it's because it aligns with the divine will. Then, of course, the two can coincide. But it can be quite different and sometimes just the opposite of what we had wanted or even imagined or expected or predicted. It can be just the opposite of that. Now, is it just something random that determines what the actual outcome will be, or does it follow a law? Because apparently it does not follow the law of the intellect. Because using the intellect, we predict a certain outcome and it does not happen so often. So obviously, it's not following the laws of our intellect. It follows a higher law, a law higher than that of the intellect, a law that we may call the law of the divine. And some of the characteristics I thought belong to this higher law was that firstly, it is extremely fair and impartial. And it has a vision which is much wider than that of the individual and much wider than that of the present moment. It's looking at a very distant future, a very big picture which transcends the individual, and it is very impartial because when we predict the consequences, very often we are partial to ourselves. We make concessions to ourselves, and that's how we predict the outcome. Even if we have not done something in the best possible way, we somehow feel that we'll get away with it and predict the outcome based on that concession that we make to ourselves. The higher law is totally impartial, makes no concessions of that type. So that is why the consequences can be quite different. So these were some of the things that I sort of reflected over during the last 1 month, and I thought I'll share them with you before we go to today's session itself. So with that, we turn to the PowerPoint for today. So today, as Richa announced, we have the final 19 verses of the Gita from verse 54 through 72 of chapter 2. These sessions are dedicated to my mother, in whose lap I heard the Gita for the first time as a toddler. As a recapitulation, the verses that we did last time, verses 39 through 53, were essentially about the necessity of enlightening our action with knowledge. What this knowledge is was also given, and Arjuna was guided towards this highest knowledge, which in fact he was told goes beyond even the scriptures, which means that already Sri Krishna is hinting at not necessarily uh, taking the scriptures as the last word. And this will come, of course, in very clear terms in the last chapter of the Gita. Sarva dharman parityajya. Forget all dharmas, abandon all of them, because that is what the scriptures give us. Abandon all of them and do something which is even higher than that. So he is already being guided towards that higher knowledge by being told that go even beyond the scriptures, because the scriptures and all the commentaries that have been made on them by wise people may only confuse you. And arrive at that higher knowledge by uniting your intelligence with the divine, which means aligning your intelligence with the divine so that your intelligence starts working entirely in light of divine guidance. And that is what yoga is about, becoming one with the divine. So our intelligence, like other parts of the being, uh, should also become one with the divine, and that is what yoga is. And that would be yoga of knowledge or jnana yoga. And that jnana yoga can then enlighten our action. And then he's told that what you can expect if you are able to align it, can expect perfect equanimity. You will renounce the fruit. You will not be attached to the fruit. And because as we have been talking repeatedly, and this is very commonly said, that the fruit or the outcome is not in our own hands, and we should be able to renounce it without feeling upset about it, being equally happy irrespective of what the outcome is. And you will be liberated from the concepts of good and evil, because in the higher law, in the scheme of the divine, there's only what is right, and these opposites of good and evil don't exist. You liberated also from the bondage of birth. Uh, Besides all other bondages, you will be liberated also from the necessity of being born again, and you will be able to transcend misery, which is sort of the other side of perfect equanimity. Now, looking at all these things which may happen, who would not get tempted? So Arjun also gets tempted and perhaps wants to know more. And that's how he asks a question at the very beginning of today's verses. That is, verse number 54 starts with a question.
अर्जुन उवाच स्थितप्रज्ञस्य का भाषा समाधिस्थस्य केशव स्थितधिः किं प्रभाषेत किमासीत व्रजेत किम्.
Interestingly, he does not ask anything very complicated about how to become a sthita pragya, or one whose intelligence is united with the divine and is therefore totally stable. Instead, he visualizes that probably such a person will acquire some very visible characteristics in terms of how he will speak, how he would sit, and how he'd walk, and that's what he wants to know. And sometimes we all make that mistake, and also, in fact, reverse the logic and say that if I start speaking, sitting, and walking like that, I'll become a sthita pragya. Because that seems much easier than all the other complicated things that we may be expected to do. Now, Sri Krishna, like a good teacher, does not ridicule the student, does not tell him that how do you expect that these external signs are so important, why do you expect them to happen? Although to some extent it does happen also. It's not that the way we speak and the way we conduct ourselves, including the way we sit and walk, is affected by our spiritual progress. But all the same, that is a byproduct, and that is not the most important thing. And certainly, by trying to speak and sit and walk that way, firstly, we will not succeed if that inner change has not happened. And secondly, that itself will not make us a sthita pragya. But all the same, Sri Krishna does not say any of those things. Instead, he tells him a little more about how to become a sthita pragya.
श्रीभगवानुवाच प्रजहाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टा स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते.
So first he's given a definition or important characteristics of one who is stable in intelligence or is a sthita pragya. Uh, and instead of the external signs which Arjuna had talked about, he's now given some inner signs, uh, inner manifestations which are not so visible. This person has no desires and is satisfied in the self by the self. That is, as with a self with a capital S, that is satisfied to be in the divine by the divine that resides within.
दुःखेषु अनुद्विग्नमना सुखेषु विगतस्पृहा वीतरागभयक्रोध स्थितधीर्मुनिरुच्यते. यः सर्वत्रानभिस्नेहः तत्तत्प्राप्य शुभाशुभम् नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. यदा संहरते चायं कूर्मुङ्गानीव सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता.
Now he's told further more qualities of one who is a sthita pragya or stable in intelligence. Uh, Further elaboration on perfect equanimity, that he remains totally undisturbed in sorrow and is not affected by good and bad events. Because no matter what type of a life we live, we don't become immune to the so-called good and bad events. Uh, we don't become immune to a road accident or to a marital disharmony or an incurable illness or having delinquent children or financial loss or litigation, we become immune to none of these things. But a person who is stable in intelligence will remain undisturbed in all such events. And of course, to remain undisturbed also in the so called good events is also important. One will not go overboard. Free from desire in the midst of pleasures. That's important again because it's easy to be free of desires when the objects which may attract us, which may create desire, are not around us. In spite of being in the midst of pleasures, for example, being in a mall where you have a display of all the beautiful dresses, jewelry, and maybe also a corner where some are being sold. Now, when you're surrounded by this type of an atmosphere, surrounded you by all these objects of desire, which bring fleeting pleasures, if one can stay free from desire in being in the midst of them, then one can truly say that one has been able to eliminate desires. This person also has no passion, no strong feelings. Uh, doesn't mean that the uh, vital or the part which is responsible for the passions, when it is totally illumined by the divine, when the vital is illumined by our divine essence, uh, it is not passionate. But that passion is of a different type, in the sense that it is vitality, energy, enthusiasm, courage, but it is not that sort of an emotional involvement which will lead to a disturbance of one's mental balance. One still remains stable, and there's no anger and there's no fear, and one remains unaffected by whatever comes, whatever ups and downs happen, whatever comes, the person remains totally unaffected by them. And it, an analogy that has been given is that of a tortoise, which can fold its legs and take them under him. And so, in the same way, a person who has this stable intelligence, who is stable in intelligence, he can draw away from the senses. So, sensory attractions may be around, senses still exist, but he is able to internally in his mind take his senses away from these attractions, fold them up, sort of.
विषया विनिवर्तन्ते निराहारस्य देहिनः रसवर्जं रसोऽप्यस्य परं दृष्ट्वा निवर्तते.
Now, here a fine sort of a point comes in this verse that one may be able to keep away from the objects that give sensory pleasure by using one's self control or self discipline, but yet retain the rasa, which is the capacity and the possibility of pleasure from these objects. And if the rasa remains, desire remains. And this is what leads us to the idea of outer versus inner renunciation. Outer renunciation means using your self control, using determination, using brute force to uh, keep away from the objects of desire. But at the same time, the desire remains. For example, if a patient is told that in illness, you should not be taking such and such food, the patient follows it, but all the same, he's thinking about it. He's waiting for the time when he'll be all right and the doctor will allow him to take a normal diet. So he's observing a pure outer renunciation. On the other hand, if a person uh, realizes that this food is unhealthy, and since food is not just for sensory pleasure, food is in fact more a bodily requirement, and this is important to fulfill with healthy food so that my body can be a fit instrument for implementing the divine will. Now, if that is the way he looks at food, then his choice, his selection of foods will be automatically that of healthy food. And even if he has so he will not have this desire for unhealthy food. And even when he has all types of delicacies in front of him, he will still try to choose healthy food as much as possible. And even if he takes the food which may not be healthy, his senses are still doing the job. He may still enjoy it, but then he knows that this will bring only a fleeting pleasure, and he's not dependent on that happiness. He'll not be thinking, when will I get this food again? And how long will that taste last in my mouth? Now, these are not the types of things he's thinking. So that is inner renunciation. So inner renunciation is inner mastery of desire. That is, one has mastered desire, one has eliminated desire rather than just trying to control it. Without inner renunciation, outer renunciation is unreal and ineffective because it's just waiting in the shadows somewhere, and as soon as an opportunity arises, the desire will come back. With inner renunciation, that is, with this realization that these objects of pleasure, sensory pleasures, will not bring lasting happiness, when this has been realized, then one gets inwardly detached. And when that happens, that outer renunciation becomes unnecessary, although it is not forbidden, which means that then it's not necessary that one should completely keep away from these things which can give sensory pleasure. For example, one can't be very selective that I will deliberately make a choice not to take anything which tastes good. Hmm? Now, that actually can be a negative type of an attachment because then the person is deliberately focusing on food that will not give good taste, rejecting it even when it is available. And at the same time, what the person is doing is thinking of taste all the time. So that is not so outer renunciation becomes unnecessary. It becomes redundant. Although it is not forbidden, one can still give it up. What one doesn't want to use, one can give it up, but it is becomes unnecessary. Not only it is becomes unnecessary, although it is not forbidden, but to some extent it will follow automatically because the person will not pursue it, the person will not be attracted by it, and if the person finds that it can be harmful, then the person will easily be able to give it up, and therefore outer renunciation may follow automatically with inner renunciation, and then it will not trouble the person, it is not a source of stress. This difference between outer and inner renunciation, Sri Aurobindo has brought out very clearly in the essays on the Gita, and he says throughout that the Gita has emphasized inner rather than outer renunciation. Inner renunciation is what is tyaga, and outer renunciation is sannyas. At some points, he makes that quite distinction between sannyas and tyaga quite clear. So the Gita has emphasized tyaga, that is inner renunciation, rather than sannyas. The same thing is embodied also in this first verse of the Isha Upanishad, Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha. By renouncing it, enjoy it. How can we renounce something and then enjoy it? In fact, we can truly enjoy it only if we have inwardly renounced it, which means that when it is available, we can have it and truly enjoy it. Why will we be enjoying it? Because then we will not be plagued with the insecurity. How long will it last? When will I get it again? Now, things of that sort will not bother us because if it is there, we can enjoy it. If it is not there, we don't miss it. So, if that is the type of state we have achieved, then one can enjoy it in spite of having renounced inwardly. So, this tyaktena, that is tyag karna, is inner renunciation. So here the Upanishad is talking about त्याग. उनका त्याग करो और उनका भोग करो, तो दोनों चीजें कर सकते हैं. You can renounce and enjoy. Now, if the rasa, that is the pleasure that comes from these objects of sensory satisfaction, if that remains, how can that go? It goes by seeing the Supreme, param drishtva. That is, one when is able to visualize, picture the Supreme everywhere and everything, and get the joy which comes from there, the bliss, the experience of bliss from seeing the Supreme, then that rasa can go. No, because rasa is a pleasure, and one can get attached to a pleasure. But then it's easy for a pleasure to go if one replaces this attachment to the lower by something higher. And one replaces it by uh, getting attached to the highest, then these small things cease to matter. So that is how it essentially happens. So that's how the rasa can go when one is able to see the Supreme, param drishtva. Then living in union with the Supreme. Having seen the Supreme, one can live in union with it, which means unite all parts of the being with it so that the body and the mind start working in alignment with the Supreme.
यततो ह्यपि कौन्तेय पुरुषस्य विपश्चितः इन्द्रियाणि प्रमाथीनि हरन्ति प्रसभं मनः तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता.
Now, Sri Krishna concedes that all that he has talked about so far is simple in theory, but the senses are very powerful. Even the wise who labor are not spared, and we know that uh, story about Vishwamitra, whose spiritual stature was rising to such levels that the chief of gods in heaven, Indra, he also felt threatened. And what did he do to sort of bring him down for his downfall? He sent a beautiful Apsara, Menaka, and she succeeded. Uh, Vishwamitra did get attracted by her and ended up having a daughter through her, Shakuntala. And then, of course, he realized his folly and went back to his tapasya again. And once, so the story goes on. But then, if a person of the stature of Vishwamitra can get disturbed by his, sensory pleasures, one can understand how powerful the senses are. So, how can we control the senses if they are so powerful? How to master them? In fact, more than control, it is master, because inner renunciation needs mastery rather than control. Control, gives the feeling of using brute force, uh, strong sort of willpower. But mastery goes beyond that, so that these pleasures don't attract us at all, and we have achieved that perfect inner renunciation. So here there is a somewhat stepwise guidance. Control the senses using the intelligence. So intelligence can take us quite far in this respect. We can control the senses using the intelligence, but control is not enough. We have to go beyond control. And for going beyond control, we have to go beyond intelligence. And going beyond intelligence means uniting the intelligence with something higher than itself, higher than intelligence itself. And what is higher than the intelligence? The highest is, of course, the divine. So that's why Sri Krishna says, be wholly given up to me, which means unite yourself completely with me, be completely devoted to me, which means intelligence can be a tool to start with for moving in that direction. But intelligence alone will not complete the task, it will not lead us to a total mastery. For that, we need to align ourselves with the divine and become a devotee. So now you can see that we are moving towards a fusion in the second chapter itself. We started with enlightened action, which means action is important, but action should be enlightened with knowledge. And now we are seeing that that is also not enough. Knowledge alone is not enough. Move from knowledge to devotion. For intelligence can be only an entry, but it will not complete the job. Now, these words which occur in one of these verses which were just recited, yukta asita matparaha. Now, yukta is joining in yoga, that is, be united. Asita, be stationed there, sit there. And matparaha, be in relationship with me. Now, this is what has been translated as be wholly given up or devoted to the divine, make the divine your sole object. And it says on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo says that just three words, yukta asita matparaha. These three words only contain the seed of the whole gist of the highest secret yet to be developed. We'll come to that rahasya and this supreme secret in some of the later chapters, but the seed has already been sown through these three simple words, yukta asita matparaha. That is, be totally devoted to the divine.
ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्गस्तेषूपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति.
Now, these are again some of the rather frequently quoted verses because they give the sequence through which desires can lead to our downfall. Uh, if we think about the objects which attract our senses with absorbing interest, the absorbing interest part is important. Dhyayato, that means we sort of contemplate upon them. The way we meditate, during meditation, we focus on something, we try to concentrate on something. It is with that type of absorbing interest, if we think about the objects of senses, it makes us feel attached to them, which means even before we have the object, we feel a strong pull. And that is what this attachment is. And this attachment naturally leads to the desire to possess that object. And if we do not get it, it leads to anger, and that anger can lead to loss of intelligence. And this we can easily understand. As they say, anger is temporary insanity, because during anger, our thinking cap is suspended. We don't think. uh, we'll completely lose control over our capacity to think. In medical terms, we say that the cerebral cortex goes only when you are acting at the limbic level, the level of the emotional part of the brain, which is the primitive part of the brain. So all the higher cortex which has developed, which has given us this capacity to control our emotions, to regulate our emotions, that is all suspended. So anger leads to loss of intelligence, and loss of intelligence leads to a downfall. So desires, being the principal source of misery, is something which we know, and Lord Buddha emphasized it a lot. Thanks to him, we all say that desires are the root cause of all misery. Unfulfilled desires will lead to misery. That is easy to understand. But even fulfilled desires eventually lead to misery. And let's see how that happens. When a desire is fulfilled, we realize after that it had some price tags associated with it. Price tags means some negative features associated with it, which were overlooked when we actually started desiring the object. At that time, they were completely forgotten or overlooked, or we were not aware of them. They revealed themselves. Those price tags reveal only after we have got the object. The second thing that happens is saturation. That is, we get tired of that object. We don't like it anymore, at least not that much. So, the more of it we have, or the longer we possess it, the more we get saturated with it. It applies to all the objects, and we can easily see it in children. Uh, you know, the child wants a toy very badly, but after the child has played it for a few days at the most, it is lying in one corner collecting dust. The child has forgotten it, and the child wants now another toy, got saturated with that one. Now, this is something which happens not only to children, it happens to adults too. The only thing is the toys are different. The toys keep getting more expensive and bigger, but the story is the same essentially. We all get saturated with all types of pleasures, be it associated with clothes or gadgets or food or sex or whatever it is, we get saturated with it. Another thing which brings misery from fulfilled desires is that we develop new desires. So the happiness really lasts between the fulfillment of one desire and the appearance of a new desire. So that is the interval during which we are happy. And during that interval, we are happy because during that interval, we have no desire. Because the desire that we had for a long time has been fulfilled, and a new desire has not yet appeared. This happens in case of big desires. Suppose you wanted a, a smartphone very badly. You got the phone and you're happy. For some time, the happiness lasts till you want a computer, say something different, something bigger. Now, till that new desire appears, one is happy. So, why the happiness is not because of getting the smartphone, the happiness is because after getting the smartphone, for some time, there was no desire. And the desire, therefore, lasts only during that interval between the fulfillment of that desire and the appearance of the next one. This is something which is important to understand. So the happiness does not reside in the smartphone, it resides in absence of desire, which lasts as long as the new desire has not appeared. Now, the new desires can be of two types. It can be more of the same. For example, one has wanted a smartphone, and then one wants not an Android but an iPhone, for example. So you want more of the same, something bigger and better of the same type. Or it may be something different that one wants. One has a phone, one wants a computer, one has a computer, now one wants a car. If one has a car, now one wants to buy a house. Now, something different. The new desire is something different in character. But these new desires do appear, and that is what takes away the happiness that came from the fulfilled desire. And in fact, now that fulfilled desire itself becomes a source of misery in a way. Then, if all these things do not happen, we become dependent on the object. And all dependence is a sort of a misery. And dependence leads also to attachment. And dependence also leads to a sense of insecurity. How long will it last? Can it be stolen? Maybe it will be stolen. Maybe it will go out of order. Maybe it will catch fire. Or any of these things. So you see, the sense of insecurity, because somewhere deep within we know that these objects of desire cannot last forever. So that's why that insecurity, and we are now so dependent on that object or so attached to it that we start feeling insecure, and therefore this fulfilled desire really does not lead to lasting happiness. It also eventually brings misery. Another source of misery from fulfilled desires is jealousy. We have a car, but our neighbor has a still bigger car. So we compare ourselves with somebody else and become jealous. And so, although we have got a car, the desire to have a car, which we had for a long time, has been fulfilled. But now we are jealous of somebody else having a still bigger car. So this fulfilled desire no longer is giving us happiness because of this jealousy. What can happen to some very sensitive people? These are, in fact, essentially good people, is another type of comparison. They have been able to fulfill the desire, but they find that there are many people around who also have the same desire, or in fact, the same need or want, but they do not have it. They can't afford it. They can't get it. So that starts making them feel either guilty or ashamed. What's the difference between feeling guilty or ashamed? One feels guilty because of having done something wrong, and one feels ashamed because of being a bad person. These are two different things. Having made one mistake and because of that feeling guilty is a small thing compared to coming to the conclusion that because I keep doing these wrong things, I should be ashamed of myself. So, sense of shame is feeling that I am a bad person. But then both these can come from this type of a comparison. Now, on the other hand, absence of desires can lead to supreme happiness. So the desires eventually lead to misery, be they fulfilled desires or unfulfilled desires. And the converse is also true. Absence of desires is the uh, key to supreme happiness. And here there's a verse from Taittiriya Upanishad, which says that suppose there be a youth, a young person, good, well versed in scriptures, well disciplined, resolute, and very strong. To him belongs all this earth full of wealth. So, what else can you imagine? Huh? He has everything that any young person may want to have. This is, suppose, one unit of human bliss. This unit of bliss of man, multiplied hundredfold, is the bliss of the one who is free from desires. So, one who is free from desires, who has been able to master the desires, overcome all desires, is 100 times happier than the person apparently whose all desires have been fulfilled. In fact, this is only first amongst about 10 verses in the Taittiriya Upanishad, where with each successive verse, the happiness gets multiplied another hundredfold, so that till you reach something like 10 raised to the power 7 or 8 times of happiness compared to this one unit. But all the same, one thing which is common to all these grades of happiness, going right up to the 10 raised to the power 8 or something like that, one thing which is common to all these verses is being free from desires. That is repeated in each of these.
रागद्वेषवियुक्तैस्तु विषयानीन्द्रियश्चरन् आत्मवश्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादमधिगच्छति प्रसादे सर्वदुःखानां हानिरस्योपजायते प्रसन्नचेतसो ह्याशु बुद्धिः पर्यवतिष्ठते.
So once again, Sri Krishna returns to the characteristics and joys of the self-disciplined person. Uh, he may move among sensory attractions and still remain free of attraction and repulsion. Uh, you might have heard of that tale of uh, Rishi Vyasa's son, Sukadev. Huh? Uh, he was sent by his father to Raja Janak to learn something more. So he goes there, and before the king, King Janak was also a great yogi, apart from being the king. He makes him go through a test. Initially, for 1 week he's kept waiting outside, as if he's come although Raja Janak knew, unwelcome guest, so he's waiting, hungry, outside. Then he's welcomed, and he's brought in, and, and then he's placed in the most luxurious apartments, where he has around him, apart from a very comfortable bed, all the nice things to eat and beautiful girls. Now, all those attractions are there. But neither was he affected by that harsh treatment that he received for a week, nor is he affected by all these pleasures by which he's surrounded. And then, of course, he's taken to the court, and there he's told to hold a small little container having some oil, which is full up to the brim, and go around the palace and come and tell all the details of what he saw. So his focus and concentration is tested, and he goes through that test also. So, he's put to all these different types of tests, where one of the major tests is that even while being among sensory attractions, he remains free of attraction and repulsion. Because you see, that is the test. If the objects of which can attract are not there, then one does not know how far one has been able to overcome the attraction, how far one has been able to develop that discipline. So that is put to test only when you are among sensory attractions. Now, this type of person attains supreme joy, the highest type of happiness, and all his miseries go, which is just the opposite of that supreme joy. So, both sides of the coin are true: supreme joy and absence of misery. And all that is because if the person is able to be among sensory attractions and yet not be attracted by them, uh, then he has overcome the desire for them. So, the supreme joy helps the intelligence get established in self knowledge. So you can see the relationship works both ways. When intelligence is established in supreme knowledge, in self knowledge, that leads to joy. And when one is in this state of joy, that can further help the intelligence get established in it, because then you have an encouragement available. Because getting totally united with the divine or with self knowledge is not a one step process, it's a graded process, it's a stepwise process. And it can work both ways. What initially one can use personal effort, discipline, control, uh, and so on. And when we realize that it's leading to joy which we had not experienced earlier, never experienced earlier, that encourages us to move further in the same direction. So this supreme joy itself can lead to intelligence getting further established in self-knowledge.
नास्ति बुद्धिरयुक्तस्य न चायुक्तस्य भावना न चाभावयतः शान्ति अशान्तस्य कुतः सुखम्.
So this verse essentially says that if you are not in yoga, that is, you are not united with the divine, there can be no peace. And when there is no peace, how can there be happiness? We often, feel that happiness and peace are two different things, and one can exist without the other. But in fact, happiness is a part of duality, which is coupled to sorrows, and one cannot have continuous happiness. Therefore, one can't have continuous happiness. What one can have as a steady thing is only peace. It's something like joy and sorrow being coupled. So it's like a sine wave, joy is going up and sorrow coming down. Peace is that stable line which doesn't have these ups and downs. So as one moves from this sine wave of joys and sorrows, on this path, then gradually the amplitude of this sine wave keeps going down. And finally, it can settle down to peace. And that is what perfect happiness, in fact, is. So without peace, there can be no happiness, which can be called really perfect, durable, unshakable, imperturbable happiness. That is not possible unless one is at peace. And that peace is not possible unless one is united with the divine. So these are again three very key words. Ashantasya kutah sukham. How can happiness exist in the absence of peace?
इन्द्रियाणां हि चरतां यन्मनोनुविधीयते तदस्य हरति प्रज्ञां वायुर्नावमिवाम्भसि तस्माद्यस्य महाबाहो निगृहीतानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता.
Now, once again, Sri Krishna concedes and reminds him that the senses can be very powerful, and therefore, uh, even in very wise people, as we saw, one can be blown away. And here, the analogy given is that sensory attractions can take intelligence away or blow a person off his feet, as it is said, just like the winds, strong winds can blow a ship away, and therefore restrain excitement of senses, which means up to a point, initially, it's also helpful if one restrains the excitement of senses by keeping away from sensory objects. Being in the midst of sensory objects and not getting attracted is a next stage in the development. So that's why the word used here is nigrah. Nigrah is restraining deliberately, keeping away from them, not having being in their presence, or using brute force to control oneself when surrounded by them. So that is nigrah. The word used earlier, where mastery was emphasized more, there was samyam. Now, samyam is different. Samyam is a process accompanied by inner renunciation. Nigraha is primarily outer renunciation. So, outer renunciation does have a place, but that is in initial stages. As one progresses, then less and less of nigraha, more and more of samyam, less and less of restraint, and more of inner renunciation.
या निशा सर्वभूतानां तस्यां जागर्ति संयमी यस्यां जागृति भूतानि सा निशा पश्यतो मुनेः.
Now, this is a rather difficult verse and complicated, but I'll try to make it simple to the extent that I myself have understood it. Can. Uh, Here, an ordinary person has been compared with a sage who has achieved self mastery. And what has been said is that what to others means ordinary people is night, to that the self mastering sage is awake, and that to which others are awake is to the self seeing sage night. Now, here, night may be compared to being asleep, and being asleep or being at night may be compared to being in ignorance, not only in a state of ignorance, but also being ignorant of one's ignorance. Because during sleep, you see, at night, we are not aware of our ignorance. Not only not aware of our ignorance, we are indifferent to having knowledge. So, along with so night signifies not only being asleep and therefore being unaware, having no knowledge, but also being unaware of our ignorance and being indifferent to both knowledge and ignorance. So, what to others is night with respect to what? With respect to the type of life that they are living, uh, respect to that, the sage is quite different. Now, here, this sage is wide awake to what? He's wide awake to the higher and deeper reality, to a way of looking at the world which is much higher, wider, and deeper than that of the ordinary person. And when he does that, then many small, small things start falling away from his life, and to him, they cease to matter. Whereas the others are involved in those small, small things so completely that they feel that what the rishi is doing is something of which they are totally unaware and to which they are totally indifferent. So while the others are in that state of night about that higher reality, to which this self-mastering sage is awake, the others are not not only not awake to it, that reality, they are unaware of it, they are indifferent to it. So that is what to others is night, to the self mastering sage is awake. And then comes the other side of it, that to which others are awake. Others are awake to what? Things which satisfy at the physical vital level, which means awake to those things which give us bodily comforts and emotional satisfaction of a very raw, unrefined type. So that type of emotional satisfaction and physical comforts is what primarily uh, most of the people are awake to, which means aware of and pursuing and engaged with. So that is what they're awake to. And those are the things which, to the self seeing sage who has seen that higher reality or is pursuing that higher reality, to him, that is night, that is, he's quite indifferent to it, quite asleep to it, not interested in it. And while explaining this verse, Dr. Radhakrishnan, in his translation and commentary, quoted this German philosopher Goethe. Goethe has said, error stands in the same relation to truth as sleeping to waking. Now, this you can see the remarkable resemblance with this verse and helps us a bit in understanding this better. Error stands in the same relation to truth as sleeping to waking.
आपूर्यमाणमचलप्रतिष्ठं समुद्रमापः प्रविशन्ति यद्वत् तद्वत् कामायं प्रविशन्ति सर्वे स शान्तिमाप्नोति न कामकामी विहाय कामान्य सर्वान् पुमाश्चरति निःस्पृहा निर्ममो निरहङ्कार स शान्तिमधिगच्छति एषा ब्राह्मी स्थितिः पार्थ नैनां प्राप्य विमुह्यति स्थित्वा स्यामन्तकालेऽपि ब्रह्मनिर्वाणमृच्छति ॐ तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासूपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे साङ्ख्ययोगो नाम द्वितीयोऽध्यायः।
So, in these concluding verses, we learn that truly at peace is he in whom desires enter as water enters sea. So, water from various rivers enters the sea. The sea is therefore getting continuously filled, and yet it remains so imperceptible. So, desires enter without creating any disturbance, without creating any significant change in the person. When these desires appear into this person or enter this person, he's free from any longing, that is, any craving and longing, as if waiting for some anxiously to get something. He's free from I and mine, this sense of possessiveness, sense of exclusive attention to oneself, that is missing in this person. This is the person who is in Brahmi Sthiti, that is in the divine state, totally submerged in the divine. Uh, he is an individual, and yet he is looking at himself not as an individual, but as a part of an infinite reality. Conclusion. So that's a sense of relief. Huh? We are nearing the end. So, but all the same, it's just conclusion. It doesn't say the concluding slide. So, knowledge should enlighten action. That we saw is coming right at the beginning of the second chapter. And this action enlightened by knowledge is perfect, karmasu kaushalam, and it is peaceful, which means one achieves samatva, samatvam yoga uchyate. Now, this theory is simple, but the practice is difficult. And that is what has come out principally in today's session. And the chief obstacle on enlightening action with knowledge is the desires which are rooted in the sensory pleasures. And the sensory pleasures can be very powerful. And here I may digress a bit uh, a- to something which Sri Ramakrishna used to say quite often. Uh, and it's based on a parable in the Garud Purana, uh, that the moth is attracted to the flame because of that bright light of the flame and gets burnt. The elephant is trapped because when a male and a female elephant are rubbing each other, enjoying that touch so much that they become totally unaware of the presence of the person who is trying to catch them, and that's how the elephant catcher is able to trap them. They become unaware of that trap because they get completely absorbed in the pleasure they are getting from each other's touch. And the deer is caught by the hunter because the hunter has mastered the technique of producing sounds which are like that of a female deer or a sort of a mate. And so the deer, thinks that a mate is available in this direction and runs towards there, and discovers that instead of the mate actually finds the hunter because the hunter was producing those sounds. And the fish is trapped because it gets attracted by the bait which is there on the fishing line, and so it is the taste of what is waiting in the bait that traps the fish. And a honeybee is quite often trapped in the flower to which it goes because it's able to smell some fragrance in that flower. So five senses, five different animals, and how they are either trapped or killed because of uh, these sensory attractions. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say that here it's only one sense involved. Human beings are amenable to getting attracted by each of these five. So you can imagine what the human state is like. So this knowledge that the fulfillment of worldly desires will not bring lasting happiness helps, but it is not enough. It has to be put into practice. Practice leads to experience. How we fulfill a desire and we find that it did not lead to lasting happiness. In fact, it could bring misery. We feel maybe it happened with this desire, it will not happen with the next one. So we repeat it. So something like, a person having a bowl of chilies in front of him, he puts one in his mouth and finds it very bitter. After some time, he feels that maybe I can try the next one may be sweet. So, the history keeps repeating itself. So, through these repeated experiences, this knowledge which he already had, that the fulfillment of no worldly desire will bring lasting happiness, this experience, which is repeated many times through the fulfillment of some desires, translates into wisdom. So now the person is wiser. The result is that now the person may have fewer desires, and even the desires that he has, their intensity goes down because the person knows that history has repeated itself so many times. Well, now I know what will happen. Even if this desire is fulfilled, what will happen that I already know. So the intensity is less. And even if this desire is not fulfilled, that will not be a great tragedy. So, in fact, he'll be able to then overcome that desire, which was weak, it was not fulfilled, or even before he has tried to fulfill it, he has already overcome it. So, overcoming a desire becomes a greater source of joy than fulfilling a desire. So, which means that we need practice to get our own experience for knowledge to be internalized. Then, the knowledge becomes our own. That is what realization is about. Realization means becoming real. Now, this knowledge becomes real to us as a result of personal experience. That is what we sometimes we call internalization of that knowledge. Now, this knowledge has been internalized, it has become a part of our experience, and therefore, now we don't call it knowledge anymore, we call it wisdom. And this wisdom helps much more than just having the knowledge. But even wisdom is not enough because we have seen very wise people can also get attracted. If Rishi Vishwamitra could be attracted, who else? So, what to talk of lesser mortals like me? So, even the wisest are not spared. So, what do we do if we live at the level of the mind? We try to rationalize. This itself is a rationalization. That if Rishi Vishwamitra could not overcome the desire completely, how can you blame me? I'm a small mortal. So, this is a type of rationalization. And many other types of reasons can also be found for justifying this attraction. And one then starts making concessions to oneself, which also come from the intellect, which means, the intellect is very versatile. And the result of this uh, intellect particularly when it starts working overtime, is rationalization of whatever we are doing, rationalization of our getting attracted to sensory pleasures, and then starting making concessions to oneself that maybe I'll be special, maybe I'll somehow escape, maybe I'm very clever, maybe nobody will notice. Maybe forgetting that there is that supreme uh, whom nothing escapes, but we feel maybe nobody will know it, nobody will notice. So, but then we don't have to even think of the divine outside who will notice it. Somewhere deep within, if we go, we ourselves also know, because the divine is within us. So we know it, but then we ignore that and we say, well, nobody will know it. Although we, somewhere deep within, if we go, we'll know that even we know it. So, but anyway, that's the function of the intellect. The intellect is, after all, an imperfect manifestation of the divine. To have an intellect which is totally illumined by the divine would make us a sthita pragya. So that is the final stage. But till then, it's only partially illumined, and therefore we will we may get attracted in spite of being wise. So wisdom alone will not help. In spite of being wise, we may get attracted, and then use the same intellect, the versatile uh, quality of this intellect, to rationalize our behavior and to make concessions to ourselves. So knowledge helps, but is not enough. When we put it into practice, generates experience, and knowledge plus experience leads to wisdom. But we saw wisdom helps, but even that is not enough. What helps is that we should get attached, instead of these objects of sensory pleasures, these objects of desire, we get attached to something higher, because we are wired for connection. And connecting to human relationships, human relationships is good, but connecting to something higher and getting attached to something higher is better, which means that we can't live in a vacuum. Getting attached is natural to us, but instead of getting attached to objects of sensory pleasures, uh, we we can get attached to something higher. So it's this replacement which is the key to detachment, not a total detachment creating a vacuum. We can't live in that vacuum. So we attach to something higher. For example, a person may be attached, say, food, but then health is a higher goal than the sensory pleasure which one gets. So he can overcome this attachment by getting attached to health being a goal. Then, health is a smaller goal as compared to being healthy, so that my body mind complex, the equipment that I have been given, can be used for the purpose for which God has given it to me. Now, health becomes a means to a still higher end. So, if you keep uh, taking the goal one notch higher, then the attachment to the lower goes down. So, attachment to something higher, for example, if take the case of a student, the student is very interested in watching, say, the TV, or spending a lot of time on social media and so on. The student is very interested in it. But he knows that if I keep doing that, I'll not get good grades in the board exam. I'll not be able to crack the entrance exams. And therefore, my career will not be bright. My life may be ruined if I don't get into a good college, if I'm not able to have a good career. Now, his goal is higher than the pleasure that he's getting from engaging with the social media, being uh, spending a lot of time with that. So when he replaces this attachment to the lower with attachment to something higher, it becomes easy to overcome this lower attachment to something lower. Now the same applies to adults. We can overcome attachment to something lower by replacing it by getting attached to something higher. And the highest that we can get attached to is the divine, and that is what we call devotion. So the key is devotion, and that is why Sri Krishna told him, Yukta Asita Matpara. That is the key. That is, unite with me, be related only to me. Now, this is a process, starting with knowledge, putting it into practice, generating these experiences repeatedly, and generating, as a result of it, wisdom, and then finding that not enough, getting attached to something higher, finally getting attached to the highest. It's a process, it needs time. And that's why time has been considered one of the important ingredients of the requirements of sadhana. Sri Aurobindo has talked about four things which help us on the spiritual path. One is knowledge, Shastra. The other is Guru. The third is effort, personal effort, or Utsaha, enthusiastic effort. And the fourth is time, Kala. So time is an important ingredient. One can't be in a hurry. One has to give it time. for it to happen. This is particularly important for some very enthusiastic young people who say that, well, I have read all this, but why is it not happening to me? They think that knowledge itself will take them all the way. What they forget is that it's a process and the process needs time. So patience and time are important requirements. Now, this is again the same thing from the mother. Yukta asita matparaha. Be completely devoted to me, be related only to me. And she has put it this way: give all you have, this is the beginning. Give all you do, this is the way. Give all you are, that's his fulfillment. Here is essays on the Gita by Sri Aurobindo, which is a unique commentary in itself, another Gita in itself. And this is, again, has commentaries primarily taken from essays on the Gita, but also some other works of Sri Aurobindo. And along with that is a verse by verse translation of each chapter in the Gita, uh, and it's Sri Aurobindo's translation. Gratitude to all these sources, which help in making the PPT more colorful as well as better informed. And apart from all these older sources, now without asking, you get at the top something generated by artificial intelligence. And very often it is amazing that it is quite satisfactory and you don't go to other sources. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there.
Thank you, sir, for a truly very rich session. And you have truly encouraged us from moving from understanding to embodiment. And this has been a very, very rich session indeed. Participants, we would like to share with you that the recording for this session, as well as all our other sessions, are available on our Yes YouTube channel, Yes Spirituality. So the recording of this talk will be made available soon, as well as you can find over 700 plus videos on our YouTube channel. So you could go and subscribe. So you have some beautiful comments here.
Questions?
Yes, and the concluding slide answered queries for some of our members. So if none, we can close today's session with a moment of silence.